Thank you. Thank you, Pat. My name is Clint Hodges. I'm an alcoholic. And I'm glad to be here tonight. I appreciate very much being invited to this conference. And if you are new here in Alcoholics Anonymous, and several of you identified yourself by standing up as being in your first week and couple of days and few weeks and months of Alcoholics Anonymous, I welcome you. And I know you are welcomed here by the people that are in this room. It's a little disconcerting, I think, if you're new to be here in a room full of sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous. I heard a guy talking not long ago who said that one of the most demoralizing things that he had to come to terms with when he was new in Alcoholics Anonymous is that he looked around the rooms in the meetings and at the people that were in those meetings, and he thought that everybody here looks like they have what it takes to stay sober. And I'm sure that if you're looking around this room and seeing these bright, happy faces and these people that are having a great, good time, you just know that they used to have a drinking problem, and you know that they're not drinking anymore, and it seems to be okay with them that they're not drinking anymore, and it must look like they have what it takes to stay sober, and it must look to you that I have what it takes to stay sober. And you know, the interesting thing is that you will come to know is that the miracle here is not that we have developed what it takes to stay sober. The wonderful thing here is that none of us has what it takes to stay sober. None of us. We cannot do that. We never did learn how to do that. We're sober because we're not doing it alone. We're sober because of the grace of a loving God. We're sober because of this program and these steps and sponsorship. We're sober because we, just like you, came somehow shoved and pushed and driven to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and then another, and then another, and then another. And so I welcome you. I am so glad to be a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. The last time I had a drink was on the 14th of August, 1966. And so next week I'll celebrate 25 years, and I think that that is an amazing thing. I just marvel that God's grace has worked in my life like that. I heard a guy not long ago tell me that God's grace had to be, you had to qualify for God's grace. And I thought, hey, I like this guy, and I thought he and I were going to part company right away. Because you had always taught me that God's grace is free. I don't have to do a thing. And he said, no, you have to qualify for it. He said, in order to have God's grace, you have to be a liar and a cheat and a thief and a real jerk. And I thought, I qualify. Thank God. Thank God. And so I want to thank you for having me here. I want to thank you for that nice room that I'm staying in. I want to thank the Alatines for putting the flowers in there. I want to thank the committee for putting a fruit basket in there. I want to thank Joe and Ann for picking me up at the airport. Joe had this sign that had my name on it in case I wouldn't know by looking at him that he's an alcoholic. I know. We've had a lot of fun. I worked in, I live in Los Angeles. Excuse me, last week I worked in New York. And when I left the hotel in New York on Friday afternoon to come over here to be with you, I got to the Newark airport and I just had that sudden flash that the place where I generally in the suitcase put my shorts and socks, and I knew I'd left them all in the drawer, and I called the hotel and they were there. And so I arrived here without any Joe said he had an extra pair of shorts. And he thought they were pretty clean. So they took me shopping today, and I bought socks and shorts and that kind of thing. So I really have kind of a sense of well-being and confidence up here tonight. I got a chance to take a brief nap this afternoon, and I don't know, I never remember my dreams, but I had an interesting dream. I dreamt that I had died, and I was on the verge of getting into heaven, and I was getting kind of a tour, somebody like St. Peter in the dream was explaining to me, and it was sort of a misty scene, and you couldn't see very well, but I looked and I saw a figure coming from over here, and I said, "Isn't that looks like Joe from Covington?" And they said, "Yeah." And he was shackled to some grotesque, dwarfy-looking thing with wine sores all over it. And they were walking together. I said, "Why is Joe walking with that thing?" And they said, "Well, Joe damn near didn't make it up here, and instead of sending him down below, they're going to let him stay up here. But for 5,000 years, he has to walk with that grotesque creature there." I thought, man, that's cold, boy. That is some kind of cold. And then over here in the distance, way in the far distance, I saw a figure of a woman coming toward me, and I said, "That's Anne from Covington." And she was shackled to some huge, hideous monster, just an ugly damn thing. And I said, "What's going on with Anne?" And Anne damn near didn't make it up here, but we let her come up, and for 10,000 years she has to be shackled to that mess. I thought, boy, that's so strange. And over here, a figure, in my dream, a strange-looking figure. At first I could just see the propeller in the beanie, and then as it got closer, I said, "That's Tony." I said, "That's right." I said, "Oh, I'm glad he made it." And he said, and then I noticed that he was walking along and shackled to Raquel Welch. And I thought, that's strange. I don't quite get that. He's a nice guy and all of that, but I don't quite understand. Here's Joe and here's Ann, and they got that mess, and now he gets to walk along with Raquel. How do you explain that? And they said, "Well, Raquel damn near didn't make it up here." That beanie. I was glad to hear Dick and Peggy today and Peg last night. What a wonderful start to this conference. And Nancy today, and I haven't seen Cease in, 10 or 12 years, but I'm going to be glad to hear him tomorrow morning. Wonderful, wonderful group of people, and I am so pleased that I know these men and women. I was raised in a very religious home, and I remember little bits and pieces out of the Bible. It's funny, there's a couple of meanings to little phrases, like in that movie Postcards from the Edge. But I was just, I hate it. And they threw me out, and they should have thrown me out. And I drank on Skid Row in Portland for a while. Burnside Street was Skid Row then. Still is, I guess, to a certain extent. And then the sign outside the post office that winter said, "The Marine Corps builds men," and I thought, God, I hope so. I hope so. Because my dad used to say, "When are you going to be a man? When are you going to be a man?" I don't know. What time is it now? I don't know the answers to these questions. And I went back to Quantico, and I went through the officer candidate school, and I've discovered in the next 3 years that Marines don't drink as much as I thought they drank. And Marine aviators they'd rather fly planes than drink. And I was in with a bunch of those guys. They said things like, we'd rather, if you want to fly with the eagles during the day, you can't play with the owls at night. And they gave me a letter of reprimand and another one. And there was a board of inquiry. And there was an invitation that I resign my commission to avoid trial by court-martial. Nasty, bleak, bad days because I loved the Marine Corps. I loved it. And I got out of there. I was not invited to extend my tour of duty. And I got out of there and I moved to Glendale. I'm now about 28 years old, and I started out living in an apartment, and then I lived in the car, and then I moved into a garage. And that summer, a bail bondsman brought me to you. I was living with 3 other guys in a garage. I was selling encyclopedias door to door. I was intimately familiar with the Glendale drunk tank and with Judge Ken White, who seemed to call the calendar when I was in front of him, and he had lost a son to a drunk driver, and he was harsh with us. And those were bad days. Those were days of where I felt an acute sense of powerlessness. When you asked me if I was powerless over alcohol, I had no trouble with that. None. None at all. None. And the despair and the dismay and the confusion and the sense of desolation and isolation that I felt then is something that we've all felt. And we laugh about it, and we look back on it, and we talk about it in a humorous way, and I have many times, and some of it creates funny stories, but there's a real loss there. A real loss. Our humanity slips away from us, and we know it's slipping away, and we can't do a thing about it. All I can do is reach for some chemical peace of mind. And when they brought me to you, I didn't stay sober from the beginning. I was around here for a few weeks, and then I took off, and I came back on the 14th of August. And I began to hear things. And the things I heard were so comforting to me, because we have developed holes in us, and those holes don't fill up with nice things. Those holes fill up with demons. And the only thing that seemed to displace the demons was the booze. And now, somehow or other, those holes were getting filled in with something else. And I noticed that, unlike the men in the church, I could hear you. I could get it when you said something to me. Not all of it, but I began to get it. And a month went by, and 2 months, and it was 9 months, and I didn't know if I was going to be around here. I really didn't. I remember one night, you know what they did? They gave me jobs in Alcoholics Anonymous, and they gave them to me early, and I loved that. I had the Monday night job meeting in Glendale. I got to set up the chairs in the meeting. I loved that because it made me feel like I had a right to sit in one of those chairs when the meeting started. I had the straightest rows of chairs in town. And one night the people that were serving on the institutional committee asked me on a Monday night. I'd see them come in there. I didn't know quite why they met there on Monday night, but a half a dozen of them would meet. They were lovely people, men and women, sober 6, 8 years, one guy 12 years, going into institutions. And they had a wonderful look about them. That wonderful thing in their eyes. Somebody called it the Molokai look, the look that, the people that went to Molokai to work with the lepers became themselves disfigured and were not real pretty, but they had a beauty about them. This guy said the beauty in their eyes, the look of people that would consistently give more than they got out of life. And so they got a lot. And these people had that look, and the night that they invited me to go with them was a night that just pleased me so much, and we tumbled down those long flight of stairs and got in Bill Christian's Chrysler in the back of that AA meeting place, and we went in the freeway and we were going down to the mental ward at Norwalk Hospital. And they were chattering and having fun. I sat in the middle in the back seat, and I just kind of listened to these people chattering and loving one another and caring for one another. And we pulled off the freeway, and we went in there, and it was getting a little bit dark. It was dusk. And I was like 9 months sober, so it was maybe April. And they said, we're going in that brick building there. That's where the mental ward is. And we're going to put on a meeting. And we got out of the car, and it hit me. Just, God, I am so slow. It hadn't even occurred to me to ask, why are they bringing me here? And then I knew. 6 of us were going to go into that nut house. 5 of them were coming back out of it. Oh, shit. I just knew it. I hadn't had a drink in 9 months, and apparently I can't live without drinking or being locked up. And my first thought was to run. I can outrun every one of these old fools. And my second thought was an interesting thought. I thought maybe if they think I belong in there, maybe I do. And it didn't make it a real cakewalk, but I walked with them, and we went in the little day room, and the orderly brought the patients down. And they sat there in their white robes and paper slippers, and we put on a meeting. And I sized them up and wondered how I'd look in paper slippers. And at the end of an hour, the meeting was over, and we stood up and we held hands and we said the Lord's Prayer. And I don't even know if we were holding hands in those days. Maybe not. The orderly took the patients back upstairs, and the 6 of us walked out into that warm spring evening and got in Bill Christian's old car and drove back to Glendale. And I slept in my bed that night, and I was glad to be there. And about that same time, they let me have my son for an afternoon without adult supervision. Wonderful day, just to be with him. And I felt good about it. And so it's been a while since those days. And an interesting thing has happened. There is a line, several places in the book, this kind of language appears. We have a choice, all of us, if we're alcoholic. We can live a life of alcoholic despair, or we can accept spiritual help. Now that's nice language, because we all say, oh, of course, I'll accept spiritual help. And yet I never really did. You know what the problem with it is? No matter which course I take, I don't have any control over it. I don't have any control if I have a life of alcoholic despair. I mean, when you got somebody helping you roll your finger over so you can get your fingerprints taken, that's not exactly a sense of control over your life. You know what I mean? When that arrest report says, I discontinued the field sobriety test because the suspect was injuring himself. You're short on power. These little phrases that kind of dot the landscape of my life. A fitness report said, Lieutenant Hodges consistently fails to live up to the low standards he has set for himself. It's just a phrase, but it does kind of point up the essence of my existence. But to accept spiritual help, if the alternative is to accept, you mean to tell me I'm supposed to turn my will and No, just make a decision. I thought you told me not to make any important decisions my first year. That ranks right up there with what Dick was talking about today. Don't get emotionally involved in your first year. We don't know if that works or not. It's never been tried, eh? It may be a good idea, and if any of you ever try it, let us know. We'd like to know. It'd be great, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be great just to know if that means anything or not? It's wonderful. Don't get emotionally involved in your first year. Did you get emotional? Shut up, I'm trying to help you. Live a life of alcoholic despair or accept spiritual help? What's behind door C? See, what happened to me is God, I had an obsession to drink, and God removed the obsession to drink, and I never doubted it. Not for a nanosecond, since in 24 years and almost 25, next week, as I say, it'll be 25. I used to say God willing, but you know what? He's willing. He's willing. I've never doubted it. I've never been far away from the fact that He removed that obsession to drink. And I've always been grateful for it. I have been grateful for that. And it was sort of I guess in my analysis of it, if I'd have really been able to think it through, I kind of had the notion that it was sort of a dive bomb approach. You're going, boom, you're through, that's it, okay. And he took off someplace, Cincinnati and points around there to work with you, and I didn't have access to him anymore in my view. And thank you very much, I appreciate it. Nice job. Thanks. And now I guess it's up to me. I don't like those other two choices. And so you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to develop my own power. That's what I'll do. I was over in Santa Fe on Memorial Day weekend, and Cindy and I went into the AA club there. And there behind the podium, and somebody had made a handmade sign, and it had the triangle and the circle around it. And around the periphery of this thing it said, God grant me the strength to fix me. And I went, oh, I wish they'd have put something about AA up there. Because that's not what this is about. But I thought it was kind of like that for a long time. So I'm going to get my own power going. Well, how can I do that? Well, I'll go to meetings. That's fine. I like that. What else will I do? I know. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to move from Glendale to the west end of town, because Glendale is not, just between us, and I know you're not going to repeat this, Glendale, California is not a power base in AA. Now, don't tell them in Glendale that, but it isn't. So I moved on the west end. I saw a powerful group out there. It wasn't really just a bunch of people and kind of milling around a man that looked like he had some power. So I jumped in with those guys and asked the guy to be my sponsor. And I'm glad I did that. Clancy's been my sponsor for 23 years almost. Maybe that's how I'll get some power. I'll attach myself to those powerful people. Well, that's not quite it either, so you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sponsor some people. I'll even take an inventory. I'll even write out some kind of stuff, and I'll read it to some. I'm going to pay some money back. I'll do that. I'll make a list. I paid my father-in-law $14,000. Took me a long time to do it. Took me a long time to do it because I told myself I couldn't afford it. Isn't that interesting? If you're holding off on amends because you can't afford it, you're keeping a lot of money out of your life so you can be right about not being able to afford it. I did anyway. You know what? I think what I'll do, to get some power cooking in my life, I know what I'll do. I'll go to law school. Somebody said go to law school. Okay, great. And I'm glad I did that. When I was 5 years sober, I started law school. And when I was 9 years sober, the state of California gave me a license to practice law. And I still do that, and I love it. I really love that. I've enjoyed it. Rumpole of the Bailey said that the practice of law had given him many years of harmless fun, and it's, it's not quite like that, but... But that would sure give you some power, wouldn't it? I mean, when I was 9 years sober, they gave me that license. When I came to you, the state wouldn't give me a license to drive a car. And so it's I must be getting someplace. Well, I think what I'll do, I need a little more power. I know what, I'll join this other firm over there and get to be a partner in it. And I did that. Worked hard and well, and showed up every day, and showed up on weekends. I gave them the very best of me. And after a while, I was a partner. Oh, to be sure I was going to meetings, to be sure I was sponsoring people, to be sure I was speaking when asked to speak. But mostly my life became about getting my own power cooking in some interesting way. And, there's not enough power being a partner in a law firm. I think what I'll do is I'll start my own deal, and I left them, and another guy and I started a law firm. Didn't do terribly well. You know what I'll do? I think I'll bring another woman into my life. 2 at a time. Let's try that. That'll give me some power. I don't quite know how, but maybe it will. And thank you very much for removing the obsession to drink. Great job. Really, nice job. Like it's a parlor trick. It's great, cute. And I meant it. You know what, that's not... I think I'll bring... You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go back to Los Angeles, and I'm going to start some guy has invited me to come in there and try big lawsuits with him, and I'm going to go do that, and I did that, and we had a stream of income cooking. A lady came into my life that was sort of an exotic kind of a person. Had some power to her. She was sort of like amphetamines in a way. I thought I could do anything with her in my life. I did some seminars. I know what I'll do. I'll take some seminars and I'll find out a little more about how my mind works. Oh, I'm going to AA meetings, and thank you very much. And I got to get my own power cooking. And I did that. And I bought a house, and I remodeled it, and here this lady and I are in this house, and I got this car, and I got a law practice, and I got a stream of income, and I'm going to meetings, and thank you very much. And then an interesting thing happened last year. I'm 24 years sober, and I got all these things in my life, and I was really bonded to them with my ego. That's who I thought I was. And then I did a really dumb thing. I forgot about the power of this program, and one day I said, "Relieve me of the bondage of self." And he did. And it hurt bad. The relationship went. This is over a year ago. This is May last year. Well, I can always explain the loss of a relationship. It's her fault. Kind of a shock, but But then the wheels fell off that law partnership in a way I did not like and did not anticipate. That scared me bad. Because my income went boom. Had to put the house on the market. Had to change the practice from Sherman Oaks to Santa Monica. Just a few miles, but it's very disruptive. And I'm 54, and I'm not all that thrilled about starting again. And I'm really in a lot of despair. They asked me to go back to Oklahoma to speak at an Al-Anon conference, and I remember the bleakness of that weekend because I went back there alone, and I was alone all weekend, and there wasn't anybody that I wanted to talk to. And I hurt bad, and there wasn't anybody to go to bed with, and there wasn't anybody to do anything with. It's just like, I'm there. And I really didn't even think I could get on the podium to give a talk. It was just awful. I don't think, and you know, every one of us once in a while has a thought about like, well, if I was drinking, I suppose this would be one of those times. But now the thoughts had some energy on them. And they were scary. And I gave a talk, and somehow or other it was bad. It was just bad. Maybe a month earlier than that, I'd been in Nashville. And I met a guy, two interesting things happened there that weekend. I met a guy that's become a friend of mine named Joe. And I heard a guy talk. He was an interesting guy. He said he'd given up on marriage. He wasn't getting married anymore. How he handled it now, he said, was every 5 years I go out and find a woman I hate and I give her a house. I thought, well, it's an approach. I don't know. Joe and I became friends. Monica and Camille and I and Joe and a bunch of people sat up late that night in Joe's room, and I began to hear things. And something began to move in me, and something began to stir in me, and I kind of began to get a glimmer of what I was later to see in the book, where it says that we can go on and on till the bitter end, blotting out the futility of the life we're leading. And when I figured out that you can do that sober, it's sort of like the penny dropped, because that's how I've been playing. And thank you very much. And I wish you would kind of, well, no, you won't help me anymore. You've given me all you can give me. But on that plane coming back from Oklahoma City after that Al-Anon weekend, I looked inside. I looked inside because the book says the great reality is deep within. And I saw something in some weird little way, without getting real spooky about it. There was a part of me, a core that was absolutely solid and unblemished. You couldn't see where the relationship had been ripped away from the side of it. You couldn't see where the income and the law firm had been. It was just solid and undamaged. And by the time I got back to Los Angeles, I had just kind of a different shift about the great reality deep within. And I went about my business, and a few weeks later, or maybe a month later, I spent a little time with Joe and Santa Monica talking about the book. And then I went to San Diego for a trial, and I was there, and one morning my part of it was over and somebody else was putting on his evidence, and I had a little breather, and I sat in my room before court started, not getting ready for the day's testimony, but looking at that book and looking at the relationship that it describes in there, and looking about that decision that's set forth concerning step 3, and you already are asked to look at, is he everything or nothing? What's it going to be? I want an answer to the question, is he everything or nothing? And I'd never answered the question, and I finally answered it, he's everything. And what's the relationship going to be like then? One of these, thank you very much? Well, what about that father and child? What about that employer-employee? What about that director and actor and principal and agent? And I looked at each one of those relationships. And if I'm the actor and he's the director, I'm on stage when he tells me to be there, saying the lines that I'm given, wearing what I'm told to wear. And my ego always tells me I should have more lines. My purpose is to be a productive part of a larger purpose, that's all. A purpose not my own. I walked out of that hotel room that morning knowing more about a father and a child than I had ever known. I walked out of that hotel room that morning having looked inside, and I saw myself by that core, leaning against it for comfort and finding peace. This is last fall. And I have since that time taken step 1 again, and step 2, and 3, and written an inventory. At the end of step 5, I was able to look in that book, and it says go back through the first 5 proposals and see if you've done them thoroughly and completely. And with a great deal of peace and joy, I could say, yes, I've done them. I've done those first 5 steps completely. With everything that I have access to, and with God's grace and God's help, I have done those completely. And I took step 6, and I looked for those things that I was not yet willing to have removed, and I found a handful of them. And I prayed for willingness that they be removed, and you know what? He removes them. It's astonishing. I heard a gal talk a couple of months ago. She was so great. She had that. This is the lady that was 20 years sober. And she expressed in her talk, she said that when I was 10 years sober, I decided the way to get over my fear of high places was to skydive, to jump out of an airplane. And she went through this elaborate preparation, and the day came. Did we talk about this? No, I guess, we were talking about it at dinner. She had her husband out there in the drop zone, her ex-husband, her kids, the people she sponsored. It was going to be quite a day. And she came out of that airplane at whatever it was, and the only awkward part of the day was that the chute didn't open. And she broke most every bone in her body. And she spent the next year and a half in bed learning how to urinate again. And she's telling this story, and she said 4 months went by and she's still in bed, and one day her ex-husband is in there and he's in AA, and he was helping her. He was giving her a bath or helping her in some way in the bed. She was in a convalescent hospital. And they got to talking about this event and about why she'd gone up there, and what it was all about. And he made a comment to her that she's never forgotten, and she reported it to us that day. Her ex-husband said, you know, it's so funny. She said, what? He said, all you had to do was humbly ask. And I laughed my head off because it's my life. Anything but ask. And when I ask in a weird kind of a way. I say, help me get over that fear. Dear God, please help me get over the fear of trying this lawsuit. It's almost like I could, it's sort of, you know what it's like? It's like, you know, 90% I can do, but if you just give me the other 10%. There's a sort of an insolence in that, like I could do it almost. Help me get over this fear. The prayer is, remove the fear. I'm screwed without you. I can't do any of it. I can't work on these things. And so from that point of view, I said, please remove these things. And you know what? It feels like he has done that. And I'm in the middle of step 8, and those amends are interesting. The listing of those people, that thing on the Reflections book this morning was interesting because it says it isn't about just I cheated or I lied. We're worthwhile human beings, and the people that we dealt with had value. I lied about Tom. I cheated Bob. This was very personal. The things that I did constituted a personal affront to valuable people. And I have to do something about that. And it has to be specific. And I have to say, face to face, what can I do to set it right? And be willing to do whatever they want. And I'm glad to be able to do that. The process has begun. Sort of like it's almost gets a little bit out of order in a way, because once you become willing to do it, my oldest son was down, and we talked and wept together, and we haven't been close. They asked me to speak at a conference in Billings, and I didn't want to go back to Billings. This is May of this year. I didn't want to go. And I flew up there with an Al-Anon gal. I didn't know her very well. I know her husband much better than I know her. Nice gal. And they picked us up at the airport, and they took us to lunch. And after lunch, she said, "Are you going to the cemetery?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "I brought something for you." And this lady that doesn't know me much got out of her bag a shopping bag. And in the shopping bag is a pair of shears and some seeds, some flower seeds, a liter of water, paper towels, Kleenex. The things I needed to go to that cemetery. And a guy gave me a ride out there, and we finally found my mother's grave. I hadn't been there in 40 years, and I didn't know what that day would bring. And I finally found that grave down there in the end of the cemetery. No, just a little flat marker. And I kneeled down with that pair of shears that she'd given me, and I'm clipping around the edge of that thing and sweeping it off and planting those seeds and crying. I mean, it had been 40 years since I'd been in the cemetery, and it had been 47 years since I had, with so much resentment and hatred, cut the lawn in front of the house in Billings. And I'm back there doing it. And I'm doing it with love. And I'm weeping the tears that I never could weep. And I knew she loved me. And I knew I loved her. And it was a healing time. God's grace has been so enormously important to me because it's been there all this time. Because I'm so richly qualified for His grace. By being a jerk and a liar and a cheat and a thief. I came back to Los Angeles and I found out that the Al-Anon group in Billings, Montana had decided to make a little project to keep in my mother's grave tended. So they love me, you know. This is a hell of a deal, this AA thing, and this Al-Anon thing. It's a hell of a deal. And if my mama was here tonight, she'd say, "What will you do when you meet your maker?" I suppose. And you know what the answer is? We've already met. I meet Him here with you. He's inside. And I'm not alone. And it seems like it's taken a while to get here. Almost 25 years with you, and it's sweeter every day. I have a lady in my life I'm just crazy about her. She and I are taking this path together. And to watch her and her little boy, it seems, you know, it's just amazing because I see that love, and it gives me a good clue about how my mother felt about me and how I felt about her before I got an attitude. And so it loops back again. It loops back again. And the path goes on. And it gets extraordinary. There is, of course, a prayer on my part that you don't have to wait as long as I had before you know that He isn't there, and thank you for whatever you did, but always available, a portable kind of a relationship, and one that is really working in a way that I never dreamed that it would work, and finally tapped into power, real power, and it's not my own, and it's not booze, and it's not my mother's God, it's a God of my very own. Thank you.